Hello and welcome from a slightly less lockdown London. You're watching Core TV. I'm Charlie Gibson. Now, conventional wisdom would probably have it that the markets, not necessarily in terms of prices, because you'll have seen some pretty dramatic volatility of late, but certainly in terms of fundraising, is not always an easy environment currently. With the world either lockdown or semi-lockdown. Well, that would be the conventional wisdom, but as so often with conventional wisdom, it can also be wrong. And one company that has raised just shy of £250,000 recently is SulNOx, and that they raised money at 40 pence. The shares are currently trading at about 42.5 pence per share. So a little turn so far, but we haven't had much time yet. But joining me down the line now from the group is its chief executive, Nicholas Nelson. Nicholas, very good morning to you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Good morning, Charlie.
Just so tell us, SulNOx, and I've had enough time to look at your website, so I know that the Sul is sulfur, the NOx is NOx as in nitrogen oxides. Tell us what you do with those things.
Oh, okay, fine. So the purpose of the company is to commercialize a fuel emulsifier to enable fuel to burn better, to burn more cleanly. So launching straight into the science of this. With a fuel, you get black smoke, you get exhaust emissions, and much of that is a result of the fuel not burning completely as it should. So this is particularly the case with ships. We're all familiar with the black smoke coming out of the funnels. That's because ships burn heavy fuel oil, which is very, very dense, and very little of that fuel makes contact with surrounding oxygen, which is why you get so much black smoke. In fact, about 50% of all the fuel that enters the engine of a ship goes up out of the exhaust pipe. So what we try and do is to try and add oxygen to the fuel, and that's how, and by emulsifying water into the fuel, all the water droplets are evenly dispersed at microscopic level throughout the fuel, and they explode violently just before the fuel burns in the combustion chamber, and that enables the surrounding oil molecules to scatter and get greater contact with the oxygen surrounding, and therefore you get a cleaner burn.
It sounds very counterintuitive, adding water to fuel.
It is. Look, this is nothing new. Adding water to fuel is a very well-known science. If you take drag racers will have water injection systems injecting water into their inlet manifold. And fuel emulsions have been experimented with since the First World War, when the military was trying to work out ways of making engines run better, more efficiently. So there is nothing new about it. It's tried and tested. There are acres and acres of research into this, and we're not the only emulsifier company out there. But we think that we are the best. We believe that we have the best emulsion, our best formulation to make an emulsion, and that's because of the stability. Once you mix the water with the fuel using our formulation, it remains stable for an extended period of time, up to 2 years, and that's very important for users of bulk fuel, bulk diesel storage companies, mines who have to store diesel for a long, long time to feed their huge vehicles, bunkering on port for ships. Even ships themselves have to have a lot of fuel on board there for a long time.
I mean, I suppose there are other ways of oxygenating fuel. Why is yours, in your opinion, the best?
Well, there aren't that many ways of oxygenating fuel, to be honest with you. Obviously, the racing car scene, they have different ways. I mean, like I said, ours is the best, and as validated by the manufacturer who makes it, which is Nurion, formerly used to be called AkzoNobel Surface Chemistry. They found our formulation, they approached us, and they wanted it because it's the best they had seen. And like I said, the reason why it's so good is that it causes the water and the fuel to mix very readily indeed. Just with a shake of a hand, you've got a perfect emulsion. And it stays in that state for an extended period of time. Also, all the ingredients, the raw ingredients, are organic and sustainable, and that's something that was very important to Nurion.
So how are you, you have Nurion, who used to be AkzoNobel, pretty big company. Why are they using you? And how are you, what do you add to them? How are you going to commercialize it? And what are you going to do that they couldn't or wouldn't do?
Okay, they have a line of products which are called surfactants. This is classed as a surfactant. So Nurion is a specialist in the manufacture and delivery of surfactants. They were specifically looking for a fuel emulsifier because it fits with their broad portfolio of surfactants. But also they know how useful a fuel emulsifier is in conquering a great challenge to the world, which is the environmental pollution. It's big news, it's everywhere, you know that, everyone knows it. People are becoming more and more alert to this, particularly with ships, which consume huge amounts of very, very dirty bitumen-like heavy fuel oil. Neurion knew that it would be useful for them. This is my understanding, I can't speak for them, but my belief is that they want to be part of saving the planet, products that help the environment.
So if you look at it from the perspective of, you mentioned ships an awful lot, a ship owner or an owner of a fleet of ships, and you're thinking the cost benefit, the cost is presumably that they have to buy the emulsifier from you. The benefit is instead of getting 60 miles per gallon or whatever they get, they're going to get 100 miles per gallon. Could you give us, I suppose, the accurate figures in terms of what the benefit is as opposed to the cost?
Yeah, okay, well, first off, obviously fuel savings is very important indeed. They consume huge amounts of fuel. They would rip your arm off for a 1% saving in fuel. We all know that. With their anti-fouling, if there's a new anti-fouling formulation which could save a fraction in terms of their fuel economy, they'll take it. But there's a particular driver beyond saving money, and that is the environment again. Ship owners, responsible ship owners, should be and always are looking at ways of reducing the toxic emissions that come from their ships. And this has been driven recently by legislation by the International Maritime Organization that came into force at the beginning of this year, which forces ships to reduce their sulfurous emissions. So from 3.5% of sulfur that comes out of the exhaust pipe down to 0.5%. This is a real challenge for them. And if they don't do something about it, they get fined hugely, and they're forced to take their ships out of the high seas and dock them. It's really very serious indeed. So these shipping companies are spending an absolute fortune now to make themselves compliant. They either fit a scrubber, which is like a great big catalytic converter, and they cost about $4 million, but you have to dry dock the ship, or certainly dock the ship, to get that scrubber fitted. So that's downtime. Or they're moving towards this ultra low sulfur fuel. But it's much more expensive, much more. It's about twice the price of ordinary heavy fuel oil. I'll come on to the downside of ultra low sulfur fuel in a moment. But our solution is so much cheaper than fitting a scrubber or converting to ultra low sulfur fuel. It's so much more effective in reducing emissions. And it's sustainable and it's easy to adopt. The barriers for a shipping company are extremely low. And I can tell you a little bit more about the challenges we faced and what we're going to be doing to overcome those later on in this interview.
And is it your product, is it very easy to use? I mean, is it as simple as, I'm going to simplify here, but unscrewing the fuel cap, pouring in a pint of emulsifier, giving it a bit of a stir, and that's it? Or is it more complicated than that?
Okay, well, we have two products. Both products are manufactured by Neurion. They worked with us in identifying the two end user groups, the two main users of fuel in the world, and they are users of bulk diesel, so not cars on the road. They hardly use anything, and ships and fossil fuel power stations. And so they wanted one product which attacks heavy fuel oil, and one which can be added as a conditioner or an additive directly to the diesel. And we're working with an ultrasonic company to ultrasonically mix the formulation with water into the HFO. So there, like I said, there are these two products. The beauty about our product or our system is that you fit it to a ship. So the whole thing can be fitted to a ship for about £450,000. It's a dosing system, including the ultrasonics, and that's it. The ship is good to go. And they get dramatic reductions in their NOx, their sulfur, and particulate matter. Particulate matter is the black stuff that comes out of an exhaust pipe. So we can reduce particulate matter by about 70%. And that's incredibly important. And it's going to become more and more important than even sulfurous emissions down the line, we believe.
particulate matter, which we used to call soot, I think, in the old days, and was the stuff that came out of chimneys and made the Houses of Parliament look black. For younger viewers, the Houses of Parliament used to be black, not sandstone coloured. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about particulate matter. But sorry, I interrupted you. Do go on.
Yeah, absolutely. It used to be called soot and smoke. The second product, as I mentioned, is just a simple diesel additive in tiny amounts. You'd mix one portion, the ratio is 1 to 2,000. One portion of our formulation to 2,000 parts of fuel. It's just a few drops. And what it's doing is it's emulsifying the existing free water that exists in all diesel. You might not know this, but when you go and fill your car up with diesel from the local petrol station, there is water in that fuel, in suspension in the fuel, and also potentially in the bottom of your fuel tank, you'll have water resting in the bottom of your fuel tank because eventually the water droplets sink down to the bottom. Now that water can be put to good use. So rather than damaging the engine, as it can do, particularly if the fuel is left standing for a long time, where it condenses inside the fuel tank, we emulsify that fuel and turn it into power. So in effect, we think that our additive will improve fuel consumption by up to 6% for a large vehicle, a heavy goods vehicle, or a piece of mine machinery, or a ship which runs on diesel, or a generator that runs on diesel. But it also reduces the exhaust emissions by about, on average, 25% across the board. That's the oxides of sulfur, oxides of nitrogen, CO2, all of these across the board. We think it will bring them all down. But fuel consumption that's our doorway in to the big diesel users.
So if we go back to the heavy fuel oil and the ships that you were talking about, you bolt your unit next to the fuel tank, or next to the engine, or next to the pump, or where does it go? How much does it cost? Right.
Yeah, you've just designed. You've got it absolutely, just there.
Right. Okay. And it feeds in, and as the fuel feeds, your emulsifier feeds into it, or does it dose the fuel tank directly?
No. Okay. So, like I said, the fuel doesn't flow until it's heated to 90 to 100 degrees. So that's the initial part, and the pipes they flow from the fuel tank. The fuel tank itself is heated. Then the pipes heat it up, and then it reaches a transfer point in the engine room, and that's where we can fit our dosing equipment. Now, the ultrasonic, in effect, the fuel would run through a holding pot, a holding tank, which is where the ultrasonic probes would be located. There'd be another tank with our formulation, and then another tank with water, or it could be from a desalination unit. They don't cost much and they're very small. All fit very neatly inside your typical ship's engine room. So you've got the water now mixed in to the ratio of 18 parts water to 80 parts fuel, and then 2 parts of our formulation. So now you've got this fuel diluted by 20%, and now it's running more freely. So you don't have to heat it up as much to make it run. It then runs through the normal filtration system into the day tanks, and then it's consumed as you'd normally expect it to consume. And we would see a dramatic reduction in soot and smoke and the sulfurous and nitrogen emissions.
So I own some dirty great big freighter, and which sails between, I don't know, Europe and the Far East or something like that. And I have a choice to either stick a catalytic converter on it or your system. The catalytic converter costs $4 million, I think you said. Yes. What does your system cost, and why do I go for yours, not the converter?
Well, ours deals particularly well with particulate matter. It costs 10% of the scrubber. They're called these exhaust scrubbers. It's called. They cost 10%.
So it costs about $400,000.
It does, yeah.
Right. Yeah. So it's way cheaper.
Way cheaper, and provides other benefits beyond the scrubber. And don't forget what happens with these scrubbers. If you're interested in a scrubber, it's a bit like a big shower cubicle. It's spraying salt water into the exhaust as it comes up through the exhaust pipe. And what it's doing is it's allowing the heavy metals to drop down out of the exhaust. But where does that go? All that now dirty, poisonous water is now in a holding tank on board the ship. What do they do with that water? Well, you be amazed to hear that many ships just dump it over the side because it's too blooming difficult to find somewhere to get rid of it on land. That's a big problem. And also there's another problem here. Many ships are moving over to this ultra low sulfur heavy fuel oil. So a scrubber has no impact on that because a scrubber is designed to remove sulfurous emissions. So now they're running on ultra low sulfur. Fuel needs sulfur in it to add lubricity, to make it lubricate the internal components. So by removing the sulfur, they have to add something back, and they add other chemicals, which are just generally called aromatics, which add back some of the lubricity. But the downside of that is that you get a lot more soot and smoke. So this whole business about the IMO, it hasn't helped. It's probably going to actually increase toxic emissions, in my personal opinion, that is, because they're taking with one hand and giving with the other. But our solution gets rid of particulate matter no matter what the fuel is, and reduces toxic emissions no matter what the fuel is, low, high, or whatever. I'd like you to think about the amount of fuel that these big ships use. It's been reported on the Transport and Environment website, which you can look up after this interview if you want, that the Carnival Cruise Line company, which has got about 100 ships, puts out the same toxic emissions as all the cars in Europe. Of all 260 million cars in Europe, that's just 100 ships. A bulk carrier would consume about 3 times your typical luxury liner, and there are 50,000 commercial ships, or the maritime, what's it called? The merchant fleet is 50,000 ships. Just think of that, of what it's doing to the planet. And that's our marketplace. That's just part of our marketplace. The other part, the fossil fuel power stations and the diesel, which is used in great volumes as well around the world.
If I look at cars as a precedent, there are 2 ways it seems to me that your business can be driven, and that's either by organizations like the IMO, either national or international organizations saying, right, you've got to make this process cleaner, and that driving the process, and the ship owner saying, all right, well, we've got to meet these emission standards, therefore we need to bolt this product into our ship because that'll solve the problem. The other way it can be driven is you're going to the ship owners and saying, look, if you bolt this in, then you'll get so many more miles per gallon, or whatever the measure is, and actually it's of economic benefit to you in its own right, regardless of the fact that it also reduces emissions. Now, what is going to drive your business plan out of those 2 things?
You've hit the nail on the head here. Unfortunately, commercial operators are focused, so businessmen and women, of course, are focused more on the bottom line than anything else, which is rather unfortunate. And I know that we're trying to change perceptions out there, but that's really what it is. Shareholders expect to see their companies driving greater profits. That's life. So we sell it initially. The doorway in is on money savings. By having this more complete burn in the combustion chamber of a ship, that's less carbon, which means that there's less servicing required, fewer oil changes, as well as better fuel consumption because you're adding a lot of water, you're getting more combustion efficiency. So let's just say we target 6% fuel saving on a ship, all told. That's really what we're going for. That's just a fuel saving. Then there's the reduced service intervals, reduced wear on mechanical components. So there's a whole host of things that we're selling it to a ship owner. It's not that easy. You'd think that they'd be dragging me into their boardroom saying, fit it now. It's still not that easy, because you're still asking them to take a big leap of faith, which is to fit something totally untried onto their ship, which is worth millions of pounds. Now, any chief engineer worth his own salt is not going to, well, he'd be very cautious, because they are actually very cautious as a breed, these chief engineers, and they don't want to be given a hard time. So we have to go through a process of convincing these chief engineers that it's not going to damage their ship, and it's not going to leave their ship stranded in the high seas. And the way that we're doing this is that we're going to conduct trials on a static engine, which burns heavy fuel oil, a land-based engine, here in the UK, just to demonstrate to a ship owner that, look, it works on this internal combustion engine. There's every reason why it should work on yours as well. So it's a case of breaking down that barrier, and that's been a real challenge for us. But this year, certainly the first, well, after summer, after lockdown, we hope to have made some progress towards that static HFO engine trial.
Can you tell us where it's going to be?
No, I can't. I'm afraid. I'm not even certain myself where the static engine is. Then okay, again with bulk diesel users, if you just take into account that a mine, your typical African mine, South African mine, would be consuming 20 million litres of diesel a month. That's a gigantic amount. These big dump trucks, excavators, you name it, and the big generators, massive electricity generators, they consume huge amounts of diesel. They have to store this diesel. It's in hot conditions, so there's a lot of water condensation. They're generally poorer quality diesel, so they're going to be higher in sulfur than the diesel that we use in this country. And that is ripe for us. And all we're asking them to do is to add a few drops of our product into their fuel tanks or into their storage tanks, and they could see a big saving in fuel, and also, if they're interested, a big saving in toxic emissions. And of course they're interested, you have to be.
So what I was going to say, what at the end of the day, what is the size of the market you think that you have access to, and how much of it do you think you can take in what period of time?
About 60% of all oil produced is sold as fuel. That's our ultimate market. It's almost it's really impossible for me to answer that. It's just too big, and it starts to become quite daft. Just one shipping company would make SulNOx extremely profitable. That's all I really want to say there. One power station, just one medium-sized power station, would give our shareholders a significant return on their investment. These are the sort of numbers I want to leave shareholders within their mind, because it'd be barking mad for me to say, oh, that will be in every power station in the world, or will be in every mine in the world. All I can talk about is what we could do if we got the ball rolling. So if we had one mine who's adopting our product, let's say one mine owned by Glencore, and it worked, why wouldn't all of Glencore's mines take this product on? Or if we had one ship with one shipping company which takes the product, why wouldn't that shipping company roll it out across their whole fleet? And unless there's some exclusivity with them, why wouldn't every shipping company want it? Because we're doing the world a favour, and we're doing them a favour.
Okay, so go on. That's the.
No, I've answered your question there.
Okay, well, let me ask the question in a slightly different way then, in a way that hopefully makes it a little bit easy to answer. But if I were to say, what should shareholders look for in terms of milestones over the next few months or years towards your achieving that goal?
Yeah, the milestones are these engine trials. I was going on to say actually in an earlier bit that just like with the shipping companies, where there's a hurdle, which is that the chief engineer is reluctant to commit this to their valuable engine until they see more evidence, hence the idea of a static trial. It's the same with any respectable big bulk diesel user, a mine or a haulage company or a power generation company. They don't want to commit to this until they've had it trialed themselves. So what we found is that they want to run the product in one of their own trucks or their own static engines. Now we've got 3 of these lined up already in South Africa with different engine manufacturers. I won't tell you who they are, but they are big ones, well-known engine manufacturers, where these engines are used in machines extensively across South Africa. And we're told that if it works in this machine, it doesn't cause it to blow up, which it won't, and it does have some benefit, then they will roll it out across their whatever it is that I'm talking about. So the milestone would be news about these engine trials, which I hope will start. They were going to happen literally before South Africa went into lockdown, and they went into a very extreme form of lockdown, far more so than we did. And but it's all lined up. They're all ready. These engine manufacturers are all rearing to go. So I'm hoping that as soon as lockdown is done, we can put out some announcements about these big names who are testing our product out there. And if it works, then immediately that will lead on to a contract. So an offtake agreement with these big users. So we're talking about mining equipment owners and haulage companies and engines which power the big generators. There's great big things that use sort of a million litres of diesel a year. That sort of, these great big gen sets.
And what sort of timelines do you think we're looking at?
All I can say, it'll be lockdown plus weeks, but so it would be lockdown plus 4 weeks. I hope that we'd have our first bit of news.
Okay, so all right. Well, Nicholas, we wish you the very best of luck with that. Ladies and gentlemen, that's Nicholas Nelson, Chief Executive of SulNOx Group. And I would say that SulNOx, it does what it says on the tin. Sul is sulfur, NOx is nitrous oxides, SulNOx, and it gets rid of those. So I think you'll agree, a very exciting technology. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for. This is me, Charlie Gibson, signing off for Core TV. We'll be hoping to bring you more such interesting investment opportunities in the very near future. But until then, you have a very capital day.